The sky was the color of steel that morning, clouds heavy and brooding, as if the heavens themselves were preparing to mourn. James Carter adjusted the collar of his faded jacket and took a steadying breath. His boots, though scuffed and worn from years of service and then years of walking everywhere he couldn't afford gas for, crunched softly against the gravel path. Beside him walked his 8-year-old son, Daniel, clutching a small bouquet of white lilies in his little hands. James had rehearsed this moment over and over in his mind during the restless night before. Today was the funeral of General Marcus Thompson, the man who had been more than a commanding officer to him. Thompson had been a mentor, a protector, even a father figure when James was deployed overseas as a frightened young soldier. In one desperate moment during battle, Thompson had pulled him to safety, risking his own life. James had sworn he would never forget that act, never fail to honor the man who had shown him what true leadership looked like. Now, as he neared the cemetery gates, James felt a mixture of grief and quiet pride. He wasn't coming as an invited dignitary or a decorated officer, but as a man whose life had been forever changed by the general's sacrifice. He only wanted a chance to say goodbye. Daniel tugged at his hand. "Dad," he whispered, "will we see the general's family there?" James smiled faintly, though the sadness in his eyes was plain. "Yes, son, they'll be there. Today's about honoring him, and everyone who loved him will be saying goodbye." The gates loomed ahead, flanked by 2 guards in dress uniform, their medals gleaming even under the gray light. The crisp precision of their posture contrasted with James's weary figure. He approached with quiet respect, lowering his head slightly, ready to state his purpose. But before he could speak, one guard lifted a hand sharply. "Sir, invitation only. This is a private ceremony." James paused, caught off guard. "I understand," he said softly, "but I served under General Thompson in Afghanistan. He saved my life. I just want to pay my respects." The guard's expression did not change. His eyes flickered briefly to Daniel, then back to James's worn jacket, his fraying cuffs, and his tired boots. "I'm sorry, sir. Orders are strict. If you don't have a pass, you cannot enter." A lump rose in James's throat. He tried again, his voice steadier. "Please, I don't need a seat. I don't need to be recognized. I just need to stand at the back, to lay these flowers down for him." He gestured to the bouquet in Daniel's hands, the stems trembling slightly as his son clutched them tighter. The second guard shifted uncomfortably, but the first shook his head. "Sir, I cannot make exceptions. Step aside." Daniel looked up at his father with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, why won't they let us in?" His voice was so soft, yet the question pierced James deeper than the guard's cold refusal. James swallowed hard. He wanted to kneel down, to explain to his son that sometimes the world failed to see the worth of people who weren't wearing shiny medals or carrying ranks. But his voice caught in his chest. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured. "Sometimes things don't go the way we want." As he turned slightly to step aside, shame and sorrow pressed down on him. Each passing mourner, dressed in black suits and polished shoes, seemed to glance at him with faint curiosity or indifference. They walked past without pause, holding elegant invitations in their hands, entering a world James once belonged to but was now barred from. He could feel his son's grip tightening, not wanting to leave. The little boy whispered, "But Dad, you told me the general was your hero. Shouldn't heroes' friends get to say goodbye?" The words stung, because they were true. James had faced gunfire and chaos, had known what it was to risk everything for the man now lying in that flag-draped casket. Yet here he stood, treated as though his presence was unworthy. James bent down, leveling his eyes with Daniel's. "We'll say goodbye in our own way, son. Sometimes the world forgets, but that doesn't mean we forget. Our love for him doesn't need permission." He tried to stand tall again, but his shoulders slumped under the weight of invisible rejection. He took a step backward, pulling Daniel gently with him, preparing to walk away from the very moment he had waited for. His heart ached, not for himself, but for the little boy beside him, because Daniel had yet to learn how easily sacrifice could be overlooked. The guards returned their focus to the line of invited guests, their faces expressionless, their duty clear. James lingered just a moment longer at the edge of the gate, eyes fixed on the rows of folding chairs and the flag fluttering in the distance. He closed his eyes and whispered silently, "I'm sorry, General. I tried." And then, with his son's small hand gripping his, he turned to leave, believing the chance to honor his mentor had been lost forever. The sudden sound of firm footsteps broke the quiet tension at the cemetery gates. Conversations hushed, and the rustle of suits and uniforms stilled as a tall figure approached with a commanding presence that made every soldier instinctively straighten their posture. It was General Robert Hayes, one of the highest-ranking officers in the nation, a man whose very name carried weight in military circles. His chest bore rows of ribbons and medals, but it was the authority in his gaze that made people step aside without question. James froze as the four-star general walked directly toward him. For a moment, he wondered if he was about to be scolded for even showing up without an invitation. Daniel's small hand clung tighter to his, the boy sensing the shift in the air. General Hayes stopped a few feet away, his sharp eyes scanning James, taking in the weather jacket, the bouquet of lilies trembling in Daniel's hands, and the quiet pain etched across the veteran's face. The silence grew heavy until Hayes's voice, steady and cutting, carried across the cemetery. "Is this how we honor the men who bled beside us?" he asked, his tone fierce yet controlled. Every guard, every mourner, even the minister preparing for the service turned their attention to him. "Do we turn away a brother in arms because his suit isn't pressed, or because he carries his scars on the outside instead of medals on his chest?" The two guards who had blocked James shifted uncomfortably, their rigid posture faltering. Hayes took another step forward, closing the space between them and James. Then, with deliberate precision, he lifted his hand and delivered a sharp salute directly to James Carter. James's breath caught in his throat. For years he had felt invisible since leaving the service, struggling to raise his son alone, often overlooked or dismissed. But in that moment, before the entire gathering, a four-star general was saluting him as though he were the most important man present. "This man is family," Hayes declared, his voice firm enough to echo across the grounds. "He enters with me." The crowd parted instantly. The guards, red-faced and silent, stepped aside. James hesitated, overwhelmed, but Hayes extended a hand, inviting him to walk forward. Slowly, James and Daniel followed, every eye watching as they were ushered toward the front rows where dignitaries and decorated officers sat. Whispers rippled through the crowd, not of judgment, but of respect. Daniel looked up at his father, his little eyes shining with awe. "Dad," he whispered, "he saluted you." James squeezed his son's hand, too choked up to respond, but the boy's proud smile was enough to fill his heart with warmth. They reached the front, just a few feet from the flag-draped casket. James stood tall, though his knees trembled, staring at the coffin that held the man who had once saved his life. Memories flooded back, of gunfire and chaos, of Thompson pulling him out of the line of fire, of the general's words after, "You go home, Carter. You take care of your family. That's how you repay me." Now, standing there with his son, James realized he had kept that promise in the only way he could. By surviving, by raising his boy with honor, even through hardship. When the minister spoke of General Thompson's bravery, James bowed his head, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. He wasn't ashamed. He had carried too much pain in silence for too long. Daniel, sensing his father's emotion, leaned against him, offering the comfort of a child's simple love. As the rifles fired their salute and the bugle's haunting notes of taps filled the air, James placed a hand over his heart. He felt the presence of every battle, every sacrifice, every brother lost. Yet here, at the general's funeral, for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. When it came time for mourners to lay flowers, Hayes nodded to James. "Go ahead, Sergeant," he said softly, using the rank James had once carried proudly. James guided Daniel forward. The boy stepped up to the casket and gently placed the white lilies on top, his small voice whispering, "Thank you for saving my dad." The crowd around them grew still, some wiping their eyes. In that simple moment, everyone was reminded that the measure of a man's legacy wasn't in his rank or medals, but in the lives he touched and the love he left behind. James whispered his own goodbye, barely audible. "Rest easy, sir. You gave me more than I ever deserved." As he straightened up, Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and reassuring. "You honor him just by being here," the general said. The service concluded, but something within James had changed. He walked away with Daniel, not as the man turned away at the gates, but as a soldier whose sacrifices had finally been recognized. His son's small steps beside him seemed lighter, his eyes brighter, filled with pride in his father. For James, the moment wasn't about status or recognition. It was about dignity restored, about brotherhood that refused to be erased by time or circumstance. And as they left the cemetery, hand in hand, James realized the greatest gift he had received wasn't just entry into a funeral, it was the reminder that kindness and honor still had a place in the world. Daniel looked up at him once more and said, "Dad, I want to be like you someday." James's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. "Then you'll be the greatest man I've ever known, son." And with that, they walked on, the gray sky breaking open just enough for a beam of sunlight to fall across the path ahead, a quiet reminder that even in moments of sorrow, hope has a way of finding its way through.